Hi, Misha here, and I'm actually waiting on the delivery, and it's decided to be winter, or at least it thinks so. So it's very windy. I apologize for that, but we still have some daylight. And I wanted to do a Kalashnikov video, but this isn't going to be like most on the channel. There isn't going to be history, not much technical. We have videos on all the guns. You can search the channel. No, this is going to be the top 10 AKs that were most influential for me personally. Also the ones that, I learned the most on, because I wouldn't say I'm an expert on AKs. I learn every day, but it's a thing. But I started somewhere, and as you're about to see, I started from absolute ignorance and just, learned myself up over the years. And these are the guns, or at least surrogates, or guns that replace the guns, stand-ins, that really helped me get on the path I am and helped me kind of refine what I like and don't like. And as you'll see throughout the video, even after 10, 15 years, an old dog can learn new tricks. I learn new things. And I'm doing this video mostly because it's not raining, but also because of all the support that came out Monday. Guys, you all, that was great. I appreciate it. I needed to pick me up. Those who signed up on Patreon, amazing. I'm trying to put more over there. Those who donated via YouTube, that's great too. The super thanks. But if you can't, I completely understand. Absolutely. But it doesn't cost anything and really doesn't even take much time. Just clicking the little like, also subscribing, and also share the channel with your friends, because I'm thinking, even though I want the channel to stay small, I think for long-term viability and for YouTube to give it any recognition at all, maybe we should think about hitting 100,000 subs. I've never really pushed for it in the past. Never really has meant anything to me, but YouTube algorithm, how it goes. So yeah, sharing with friends, getting them to sign up will really help. I don't think we can do 100,000 before the end of 2024, but if you'd like to prove me wrong and say I told you so, I'd do with that. True definition of a win-win, right? But at least can we go over 80,000? How about that goal? And then 100,000 is a stretch goal, or whatever the kids call it. And yeah, gonna be looking at Twitter and X soon. And a friend also said just today he had some ideas for Instagram. Never even been on there, but he helps me do a lot of these videos and other things, so I might dabble them around there. We'll see. Got ideas coming on, and I have posted some fresh stuff over on Patreon, so check that out if you're interested. But yeah, this is just going to be about me and my AK journey as it happens. So top 10 most influential, most important guns. Not the best, not the greatest, not even necessarily my favorites. Just ones that kind of stood out to me. But in tradition around here, before you dive in, an honorable mention, a runner-up. Because it's not an AK, it's not a Kalashnikov. But me and the Czechoslovakian, Czech Republic, VZ or VZ 58, 7.62-39. Often mistaken for an AK, especially back in the day when I was getting started. People just thought, it's from that part of the world. You get it, there wasn't a lot of info. But the only thing it does share with the Kalashnikov is the caliber. And when I was getting into guns, it was still during the assault weapons ban. The only maker of these built a few from kits, and it was Ohio Ordnance. And back around 2003, 2004, they wanted 1,500. To put that in perspective, Arsenal was asking 1,400 for their custom shop guns and 600 for their standard. So, a little bit of money. And I was really tempted, but I never had that money. I was in graduate school at the time. Just couldn't do it. But in 2006, the first imports came in. And this isn't one, it actually came in the store recently. A friend found it local. But it looks very similar to the first gun I got. My sales rep at Century knew how much I had a thing for the VZ58, and that's because, I am blind. I I read that it wasn't an AK, but I didn't understand how it wasn't an AK. And the specs looked wild. A milled receiver, but it's lighter than a stamped AKM. What the heck? Bolt hold open, magazine? What the heck? A striker firing system, or an annual or hammer if you prefer? What the heck? So when the first import batch, which was Century Arms, came in, he signed me up. By the way, you can top these up with stripper clips, which is really cool. But the reason it's important to me, not just because I kind of had a weird interest in these before they became popular and known when all the kids came over, when that gun came in, it was a straight sporter. Thumbhold stock, single stack magwell. Now they all come in with a cap on the barrel, at least the original ones when they had the 15.4 inch barrel. Later ones have the 16 pinned on, so this is the same kind of configuration. And they built them at the time at D-Technic, later Czech Small Arms, using a lot of original parts. Original barrel, original front sight. This is before the barrel ban really took effect and all that stuff, and it was a foreign gun anyway. And a brand new machined semi-automatic receiver. Now luckily for the conversion parts, my Century rep also nabbed to me an armorer's kit, which had a lot of cool stuff in it, including 10 of these unique mags, which are, it's good they had them in there because these are not AK mags in no way, shape, or form are interchangeable. I just had a lot of experience and a lot of good times with that gun. It held a special place and something I had wanted, and it was kind of a dream come true. Of course, later, you would get the Checkpoint guys. They would partner with several companies. This one's TGI. They also did the work for CZ USA. And of course, Century eventually built a lot of those VZ 2008s from parts kits, which, for the money, were a dang good gun and really got this gun recognized. And I was really happy to see it. That's why you see a VZ58 video on the channel at least every 6 months. It's just kind of gets me right here. And I've been happy to share the love of this with folks like Jay. And with that, enough of the let's get into the real thing. Number 1. No award for guessing, because it's a gun that I talk about on the channel and it'll bring out at least once a year as kind of an anniversary. This was my first AK. Almost the first one I ever fired. I had shot a couple previously in the 90s that like Mac Nye's friends had, but didn't really spend a lot of time with them. Wasn't super interested. When I was a teenager, I was more into girls and other things. But rediscovered guns and picked this up. And while some of the guns in this video are going to be replacements or stand-ins, this is my original. And it's been with me through thick and thin. And as I tell, I didn't know jack about AKs when I bought this. I bought it because it was a Friday night and I was talking with a friend. This was during the assault weapons ban. So we were having a party and he said, "You can't buy AKs anymore." And I said, "Yeah, you can." We're talking about the 94 assault weapons ban. I said, "Yeah, they're not as good as they were," but I said, they're still AKs. He said, "No, you can't." I said, "Want to bet?" Of course, we've been not sober. And he said, "Sure." So we bet lunch the next day and went to a local gun shop where I actually made a couple of lifelong friends. One of them I spoke to earlier today. And sure enough, they had AKs. A few pre-bans and stuff, but in the new guns, they had this and Egyptian Mahdi's. At that time, it would have been the Misser. And I bought this version because it just seemed like I had a little bit better fit and finish. Had a scope rail. Not that I can use one, but yeah, it felt good. And that introduced me to, and it came with one surplus, so-called pre-ban, so pre-September 94, steel mag, and then one short little mag, and then a green canvas sling. Put a leather one on it, but I've still got the green sling, and it came with the cleaning kit and a wonderfully Cosmo oil-stained box. And really, even though it was this during the federal assault weapons ban, what was nice about the SARs, they had the dimpled magwells, and usually when Century sold them, they had the pistol grip and regular stock. Even if not, they weren't curved in the back, they were square cut receivers. So the really only concessions they had to do were chop the bayonet lug and luckily with these, they never threaded the barrel at the factory. So those are the two things to make it assault weapons ban compliant. Of course, after the sunset, you could add both back. You could add a folding stock if you wanted. I did thread the barrel on this several years ago. And I remember that day. We bought it. It was a Saturday, like I said. We were hungover but young, so it didn't matter. Had lunch, got some ammo, got a couple extra mags. You could still get surplus pre-ban AK mags, pretty inexpensive at the store, and drove out to the cabin. I remember the Cosmoline and loading it up and just that feel of the gun. And I knew jack shit about it. I'd only recently kind of gotten back into guns. I, of course, was taught to shoot and be safe as a child. But again, teenage years, found other things, sometimes in a can or bottle, that interested me more. And I'd recently fallen back into guns because of meeting another friend at a New Year's party who brought a 1911 out, and I shot it that day. And I had bought a few guns at the beginning of the year, but they were like Mosins, a Makarov, because they were super cheap at the time. This was the most modern gun I owned, and I really didn't plan on it. And I knew nothing about it aside from literally the basics. I didn't even know really how to field strip it for cleaning. And I'll confess something. I wasn't 100% sure what this was. I know. Yeah. That's how ignorant I was of the AK. But you know what? I started to learn. But of course, once the assault weapons ban came off, it really opened up the AK market. But even though it was pretty much out of accident, and I would not have been poorly served by grabbing a Mod-E. I'm not trash-talking Mod-Es. But I just lucked into it. Of course, back then, you weren't going to get like a US-made AK. They just didn't exist. There was no reason that the imports were cheap. And so it was timing, too. I happened to pick a good one, and the timing was right, and the money was good. Back then, retail in a store for a gun like this was $400, and if you knew someone got it at cost, they were closer to $350. Online buying was a little sus at that time for guns. It was just kind of coming in, and that's really a good transition point to talk about our next one. Number 2, and I believe the second Kalashnikov I ever bought. And again, no prizes for guessing it. The Romanian SAR-2. The companion to the SAR-1 over there. This one's actually seen a lot of changes over the years, but it took me well over a decade to do everything I wanted to it. In fact, I still bought it during the assault weapons ban. We were talking one day, and I don't know what got brought up, but the 5.45 millimeter bullet, 5.45 by 39, came up. And at that time, it was pretty unknown in America. The ammo had only been imported in pretty small batches for about 5 years. There were only a couple of guns chambered for it. Parts kits really hadn't hit yet. Most of what we knew came through events in Afghanistan. So it had a bit of a mythical presentation. And I don't know what about it. It was just kind of like that VZ58. Whenever something interesting was described to me, especially since I couldn't see photos, I just had to get one. And as I mentioned a minute ago, online, Impact Guns, which I believe is still around, was showing this jobber, the Romanian SAR-2. Essentially the exact same gun as the SAR-1, but in 5.45. And it was on their website. But no stores really carried them. It was too much of a specialty gun. You could find the SAR-3s, the 5.56 version, in stores here, but not the 5.45. And hey, it came in. Now back then, when you special ordered a gun, it could take a month to get there, or more. I was like, okay, cool. Went over and grabbed it, and it actually came with really pretty wood, which is ironic because a family member saw mine and loved it, and then his came in, he special ordered it, and it had the most ugly baby poop brown wood with a big old thumbprint in it, like where someone had grabbed it while it was still wet. And that became a joke for years that I got really pretty wood and I couldn't even appreciate it. And he liked my gun so much, and his was the ugliest gun ever. And then, of course, I didn't end up using the wood. In fact, this gun went through a lot of changes. Luckily, I did buy the 5.45 ammo. Now, this was still during the assault weapons ban, so we didn't have the Romanian steel mags. What they shipped them with were certified pre-ban mags, the Bakelites. Easy to know these are pre-banned because they quit making them in Russia and East Germany long before '94. In fact, most of them were East German, maybe all. And the mags are actually very cheap, around $10 for unissued because so few people had the guns. Now, quite a few were converted to 223 with mixed results for the SAR-3. That's what we had to do back in the day to get the whole pre-ban thing going. So it didn't come with this stock. And I most definitely did not buy this stock from Florida Gun Works in 2003. Nope. Good news is it's actually the correct push button style. I promise I put it on the gun in October of 2004. But the hardest part to find for eons was up here. The front sight base, you could actually get these unissued from time to time, but it was actually the muzzle brake, and this is a true muzzle brake, not a flash hider. And what made these hard, this is not 24 millimeter threads, this is 22. As far as I know, this is the only gun that really uses this pattern. So finding the devices, especially if you didn't want a replica later on, a real one, I had to wait till the PA-86 kits came in, which, you know, this is what it is. It's a PA-86 based gun. You know, doing that over the years, it was pretty unique at the time. And that's why, in all sincerity, I was one of the first folks to kind of get into 5.45 around here. And part of it was just my innate curiosity. And by this point, I was starting to learn a bit about AKs. I kind of had caught the bug after owning the SAR-1. I remember I was talking with a friend on AOL Messenger, and I said, hey, I got an AK-74. And he, you know, he was a nice, great guy. But he said, AK-47. I said, no, 74. He's like, what do you mean? So I sent him a link to the Modern Firearms RU, Max's website. And at that time, he didn't have the P86 up. He just had the 74. So next time you come over, number 3. And really the first feature-free, or we call them at the time, ban-free AK I picked up. Although this isn't it. The Yugoslavian M70 AB2. In late 04, a lot of friends were picking up Wasser 10s that had the threaded barrels, bayonet lugs. Some had like a Tapco or ATI cheesy folding stock. But since I had the remaining guns already, I passed. Century announced these, I believe, around November. Or not these, but, you know, AB2s. Now, those were kit builds. And what's interesting, they were on U.S. receivers, pretty obvious reasons. Once a machine gun, always a machine gun. But they had U.S. barrels, Green Mountain. This was long before the barrel ban, which came down in 2005, but it was a little more complicated than that. No, the reason they did, the Yugoslavian barrels were often pretty dark and they weren't chrome lined, so Century, not wanting to get a lot of complaints, actually ponied up and put fresh barrels in them. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. The AB2 would be my first experience with a kit build. And the first one I ordered was run over twice by a UPS truck, production run. So I actually ended up having to wait until 2005 to finally get one. And what really attracted me, yeah, they had the 14 mil threads. Yeah, they had a bayonet lug. They had the grenade sights. But it was the underfolding butt stock. It was something we just could not have during the assault weapons ban. And it wasn't something that could be easily added to like an SAR-1 because it has its own trunnion and latch. And back then, AK gunsmiths weren't exactly common. At that time, it was the most expensive AK I'd bought. It was around $500 retail at that time. And I learned a lot with it. I learned that underfolder stocks are cool. to look at, even if you're blind. And while I don't think they're as horrible to shoot with as some make them out to be, I mean, I don't have to aim down the sights, so I don't have to really tuck in. But we just wanted stuff like this because for 10 years, we couldn't. You know, that's the best way to have people want something, is tell them they can't have it. Now, one unique feature with this version, which is the current Serbian Zastava ZPAP M70 UF, is this scope rail. But my second one was a good go. It was a good shooter gun. Of course, I put the Yugo last round hole open mag in this one. That's how much I care about you guys. I actually took the time to get mags out for each of these. And that was my first exposure, not just to a parts kit, not just an underfolding stock, but the idea that different nations kind of did things differently, like this extended handguard and the heavier barrel and the 1.5 mil receiver bulge trun. But I think it only kind of whetted my appetite. And, you know, with the freeing up of so many things and more kits coming in post sunset, prices were actually coming down. But there was something I really had my eye on, metaphorically speaking. I had a 7.62, I had a 5.45, I had an underfolder. What about a milled? Around this time I was getting super intrigued by the original AK-47. Number 4, and this was a real teaching moment. And this gun just kind of stands in for the original AK Type 3. The milled AK. And I've been looking at parts kits, especially the Russian ones. You saw the so-called PLO, the Palestinian ones. They were sent to the Palestinians and then captured by Israel and then sold over here. And, okay, again, confession. They had Type 3s, pretty nice shape, mostly matching. They had some Type 2s, very rarely matching, almost never, and the shape wasn't as good. And they did have Type 1s, never matching, sometimes rough condition or missing parts. I didn't ever really think about a Type 1 because no one was doing that style of early stamped receiver. Back then, just getting a milled receiver was difficult. And this is a old firing line made next door in Oklahoma. And these were among the best early receivers. Later on, the milled market would kind of get flooded with the investment cast receivers and get a mixed reputation. But early on, factories like this would make true forged receivers. There would also be an import we'll talk about in a minute. So I went with the Type 3. And actually the first Type 3 kit I bought was a Hungarian, an AK-55. Because they were just gorgeous and in great shape. Wouldn't be till later I picked up this Russian here. Put the correct slab side mag in it. It's got the correct early sling. But it really showed me very quickly, it wasn't just, oh, milled receiver, stamped receiver. It showed me the difference, the changes. Really, almost every part's different between the AK-47 and AKM. You know, the tangs on the stock, the smooth, heavier top cover. The sights are even calibrated 800 meters instead of 1,000. The bulk carrier group doesn't have the lightning cuts. Slab handguard, heavier barrel. The original style bayonet lug, which, fun fact, even during the assault weapons ban, this little notch here for the bayonet often was overlooked and was left on guns, even though it probably shouldn't have been. No one cared. I think people took the ban a lot more serious in the 90s, but by the 2000s, I even talked to ATF officers then, and they didn't care. But I got to learn, and I learned just how smooth and nice an AK could be. It really shatters the reputation of these being kind of rattly sheet steel guns with bad trigger. But this really made me feel like I was completing the historical AK set. And learned a lot. And then the Century Polish 1960s while not perfect, really made a authentic milled type gun affordable for the masses, and good on them. Those are still among the better quote-unquote milled, even though the receivers started off as kind of a casting and were machined into final shape. And yeah, by this point I'm starting to learn a bit about AKs. Really, I am. The internet's becoming more and more helpful, and they're getting popular. 2005, 2007 was the time when AKs went from this weird commie gun, very obscure, to kind of popular around the nation. And I'd already been in the market a couple of years, still very much a learner, but I'd had a couple of years head start on people, and that kind of got me the little bit of the reputation even back then as an AK. Back then the kits came in with the original barrels. Like I said, the barrel ban came in 05. It was part of a deal with the ATF redefining what was a machine gun, parts of a machine gun, and they decided that, kind of like with once a machine gun, always a machine gun thing for a receiver. Well, if a barrel had been used on a machine gun, it was no longer allowed with the kit. It had to be cut up. Now the good news is, anyone who had an extant import permit, and sometimes you can have a multi-year, very open permit, that meant some kits still came in with barrels through 2008, 2009. And by other means, some importers were able to get them approved. But if you were just applying for a new import license for a new batch of kits, say out of Poland in 2006, sorry, those gorgeous Circle 11 barrels are getting the hack job. And not just in one spot, just like the receiver, multiple choppies. And by this time they got serious about, nope, you can't saw cut it, you gotta torch it. And that was, man, it made, yeah, the AK kit market was a lot of fun when the front end was intact, but once they made you start cutting up the barrels and having to use barrel and all that, that's kind of when kit building really lost interest for me. So really, right as I was getting intrigued with it is when you couldn't do it anymore effectively. And there are a lot of great kits that would come in and had the barrels cut up. What do you do? Well, my next step, I realized all my guns have woodies, but the AK has been modernized. Who's doing a modern AK-5? Misha meets Arsenal. And I picked this one, the SAM 7 SFC. Now, obviously, this is not an original. And you're probably wondering what the... Well, I'll explain. But let me go back. Now, the first time I saw Arsenals, it was still during the assault weapons ban, but just barely, so probably sometime in earlier 04. They were the SAM, or rather SA space M-7 series. So they had the fixed break and no bayonet lug, but it was a milled receiver. That was cool to me because it was a US made, it was a foreign made milled receiver. Now they had been selling just virgin SLR 100 milled receivers for a while. A lot of the Hungarian and Polish builds were on those, but they were for a press and pin barrel. The kits were threaded. I didn't know anyone who could help me do that at the time. I just wasn't super interested. They were cool though. That was, as I mentioned a minute ago, the other option if you did want to use a US receiver. And sometimes just finding like a firing line was hard to do. They didn't make them in huge quantities. So I got to think, these are guns. I saw them in the store. I thought, man, they're nice. Then I saw the price tag. $650. By the way, same store I bought the SAR-1 at. At that time, you could get a Wasser 10 for $350 in the store. So almost double. And for what? A milled receiver. And those were just the basic versions. But once the ban came off, I thought, maybe this is the time. And as I mentioned in the SFC video, while I never bought this configuration, that store had one of the few built come in for a customer, and I got to handle it. But the asking price back then of $1,400, it was too rich for my blood. I thought it was neat. Folding stock, the combo. This is actually the first time I ever saw like an AK-102, 104 style gas system. So what I ended up doing at the end of 04 is I ordered, because they were still kind of running a few months out because they were switching from the band style to the no band style, like the SAM 7S to the SAM 7R and all that stuff. But I ordered the SAM 5R. I thought, I've got a 545, I've got a 762, several of them now. To me, 3 or 4 seem like several. Oh, if I only would know my future. How about a 556? And really liked it. And I called it an AK-101. I knew even at the time it wasn't accurate because of the milled receiver versus stamped, but I really didn't know how wrong I was till later because we just didn't have a lot of exposure. Again, blind, can't see photos. But a lot of friends loved it. They did. And I kept that gun until 2010 when I sold it. I was recently married, needed the money, and, things happen. What can you do? I don't regret it, but I always wanted to get another one. In 2006, they started introducing a stamped line. They had that test with the 105, where they did the 106, 107. They did not just full size, but they did crinks and the CR style here. And they had the left side folding stock. Now back then, I had no clue about 4.5 millimeter, 5.5 millimeter pins. I just knew it looked like an AK-100 series, and it did. So I did grab one of those too. That's actually one reason I brought this out today. The first stamped arsenal I ever bought, I believe the end of 06, maybe beginning of 07, was an SLR 106 CR. I figured, well, I've got the M5, I've got the mags for it. 5.56 might be more fun out of a short system. And that was my first kind of modern type guns. Of course, these aren't based on the Russian Century series. These are actually based on the AR M1 and AR M9, M12 series out of Bulgaria. I was learning. At some points at this time period, I thought I kind of knew it all, and other points I would realize I didn't know jack. And every day, new kits were coming in, but at the same time, I was in and out of the country. I was overseas, so my AK buying was slow. One good thing about being overseas, though, I was able to do a lot of internet research. And by this point, the internet's kind of catching up with the AK. And it was a good time to be in AKs. Parts were still cheap, and it was a growing community and a lot of sharing, a lot of love, a lot of enjoyment. And that's really great. And what I really like about any kind of activity, sport, hobby. This time, everything's awash in surplus. The 1063 Wassers are out, driving the price to a new low for Romanians. But, you know how I said at that gun shop I noticed the milled arsenals on the rack? I was also noticing something else. Something that I never thought we'd see, and really by all rights, we shouldn't have seen. But it had some drawbacks. But at the end of 2008, even those were taken away. I was overseas when this happened, so I watched it from afar, along with the election. But the first thing I did when I came back was order one. Number 6. This was a big learning experience for me. The Russian situation. Zygas, if you prefer. Going back to 94, the U.S. and Russia, Clinton and Yeltsin, had a bilateral agreement. And part of that was Russia said they weren't going to send military-type guns for civilian sales in America. So they voluntarily stopped export on all but, very strictly speaking, hunting guns, shotguns and the like. But a few companies started bringing over the most huntery, sportery Zygas in the mid to late 90s. Then Arsenal got in the game. I guess already having success with the 107, 106 series. In 2008, they introduced the first SGL. Now, the SGLs are Zygas, but they're still made at the same Izhmash today, Kalashnikov concern factory, but they're out of their custom shop, the Legion shop. And that's actually important because it meant that instead of just importing whatever they're making over in Russia, and the only one that was even close to being available for export was the Super Sporter one, they could kind of custom do one there in relatively small numbers for Arsenal. But guys, this was amazing. We never thought we'd see a Russian gun with half those features. And then in 2009, it just got better with this gun. They introduced a 5.45 version. Before that, 5.45 Russian Saigas were very uncommon in America. So to get one in an SGL configuration was great. And then they introduced the side folder. And that's really the type of gun that showed me the difference between Bulgarian modern and Russian modern. And they were cheap, at least relatively so. When they first came out, they were about $900 for the fixed stalker. But after the gun market died in 2009, that fall, they did what they called the AK stimulus plan, and they put the SGL 20 or 21, the difference is very small, retail for $500. Can't knock that. The 5.45s never quite got that cheap, but the fixed stock was around $700, and the folder here, people thought it was too expensive at the time, was around $1,000. Oh man, they just said, who wants to pay that for a converted Saiga? And if it had been past me, I would have just listened to him. Oh yeah, we can do as good of a job. Who cares? Get one from the store, because at one time a basic Saiga was not even $200 at the store. In my mind, by the time you got all the original parts and you weren't just kind of flubbing it off using Bulgarian, if you used the correct Russian parts, and then you either took your time to do the work or paid a gunsmith and then refinished the gun because it would need refinishing, it cost about the same. So I learned that, especially post-barrel ban, kit builds weren't all that it was cracked up to be. A lot of times you think you're getting a deal, but then if you start adding up your cost and valuing your time, you realize you should have just probably bought the import. And this is when I started to kind of adopt my buy once, cry once attitude. It's not that I just, money grows on trees and I don't care. It's that I'm thinking long term, and it's the guns like the Saigas that got me to think, what's the long term cost of things? We never thought we'd see something like this, so you have to give your hats off to Arsenal. Later, Fime Group took over importation in 2013, and it was not going to last. These were obviously sanctioned in the summer of 2014 following the whole Crimea thing, and, just kind of went from bad to worse. Sad, but true. But for about 5 years, these weren't just available. They were common, and they did a good number of variations. And it was a dream come true for a lot of us, because we just never thought we would see it. But it wouldn't be the last time that would happen. No sirree. Number 7, and honestly, this video could have just been all Romanian all the time, because they're so influential, especially when I was getting into AKs. The AES-10B. Now this is the paratrooper model, but my kind of journey with this gun was long and at times frustrating. But now I'm happy. I have been for years. I first kind of learned about the RPK going way back to the ban again. I read about the heavy receiver. I knew about the Yugos. I'd actually ordered a Saiga from Shotgun News, and they had 7.62, 39, 223, and 308 listed. But by the time I ordered, they only had 308s. And the reason I wanted them, they had factory pistol grips. I don't know how they came in. Long story. 20 years in the past, small batch. I don't remember the import. I think it might have been that Big Bear. But that got me, I looked at the receiver on the 308 and I realized it's the heavy RPK receiver, and that got me intrigued. Now, as the Sporter, the Hunter Sagas started coming in, some places, like Military Gun Supply down in Texas, were converting them, like taking the 20-inch and making it into a quote-unquote RPK, putting on the bipod, all that. But even then, I knew they weren't really correct. You can't just put a clubfoot stock, trusting Romania and kind of buying into Century's marketing. They had it with the drum and the bipod. It looked cool. I ordered the first AES-10, and I've done a full video on it. Not an RPK. It had a longer barrel, about a 20-inch barrel, but it was light. Had a paddle buttstock, but a standard Wasser 10 handguard. Yeah, it would take a drum, any AK would, and it did have a bipod, but it was actually mounted back here, kind of under the gas block, and was the wrong type anyway, on a light barrel. And it had a standard 1mm receiver, standard trunnion, standard rib top cover. It did have a carry handle, which is great, because that's not even a feature a lot of RPKs had. Some Romanians did, I know. So basically, they took a Boss 10 with a long barrel, put a clubfoot stock on it, put on the incorrect bipod, had the carry handle, and they said it was an RPK. And they put a picture with the drum. I bought into it, got it in, and oh, I so tried to be happy with it. It was an import. Remember the day I got it, it was snowing. We went out in the snow and shot it at a friend's house. That was a cool memory. It sat on my desk there for a while. I even tried putting an RPK windage rear sight because they didn't even have the windage rear sight. I even put an RPK smooth top cover. I got the parts from K-Bar. I did my best to love it. But then a friend really did. He talked me out of it, and it just wasn't an RPK. Then the AES-10Bs came in, fixed stock, and they had the right receiver, trunnion, sights, correct 23-inch heavy barrel. But the first generation actually had the PKM style bipod. Now, there is some evidence that even Romanian military PM64 LMGs might have used that PKM as a substitute standard bipod. Hard to say. But I did pick one up, and they were very cheap. I mean, then these came out. You know how I said the AS-10Bs were cheap? These weren't. They were like $900 dealer cost or something. The paratrooper model. And I thought, that's just a folding stock. And it's true, but these were all built from kind of rare 1989 kits. And they all had the cool, unique Romanian adjustable feet bipod. About the only thing they didn't have was the Dong foregrip. It took me years to find one. Arms of America finally had some. I let the fixed stock go, and I'm glad I went with this one because the fixed stocks are neat, but they still come in from time to time. But this version, the Paratrooper built from a kit in Romania, these are basically like the Wasser 1063, what they did with those and these two and some other guns. New receiver, new barrel, but both made the original specs. It's just not with the full auto and the receiver. But then the other parts were serial matching from original kits, at least most of them. And so this is close to a service gun as you can get. And I like it because of being a late style. It has more unique Romanian features. Now, one thing, it probably should just have a muzzle nut on here. I put on a Romanian. I need to get this out and shoot it again. I've been meaning to take it out for quite a while. Just fun. Now, fun fact too, I believe it was Monarch ammo. Jay had one of these, and he shot non-corrosive Monarch in his, and it corroded. He got pitting, light kind of orangey rust, not in the places you'd think, but actually under his handguard. It must have blown back from the gas ports and kind of went under here. And I would have laughed at him for just assuming non-corrosive with imported ammo. But I honestly felt his pain because a couple of years earlier, I made the same boneheaded mistake. Number 8, combining two of my favorite AK things, RPKs and 545x39. You might be wondering why I didn't pick something else for this, but I'll explain, because this was honestly more influential. This is a Bulgarian RPK-74 original kit on a Nodak receiver, assembled by a Vector of Utah, now gone. And they were one of the few companies to kind of sell on their website these RPK-74 builds. These kits only came in limited numbers, maybe a couple of thousand. I've seen even just 700. Either way, Vector got their hands on several. The limiting factor was getting a receiver. Not many of these are made. I believe maybe only Nodak made them. Some good news, the kits still had the barrels. So a friend of mine, the same one who bought that AES-10 off of me, ordered some. And I was on the phone with him back when we still ordered things over the phone versus internet. And while they were offering wood, they did have some of this here plum furniture. But they didn't have it advertised because it was surplus. You know, they could re-shellac and fix wood, but they didn't do much with it. So they said, as long as you don't mind a few nicks and scrapes, plum. Cool. So that's what I ordered, a plum gun. And the rail was optional. I didn't order mine with a rail. My friend did. And the rail he got looked good, but it was actually ever so slightly off true. Yeah, when you're mounting an optic, you really need to put a rail on with the right fixture. Otherwise, it's probably not going to be completely right. Again, says the blind. Like I said, I didn't order mine with the rail. This one has a rail. Remember that boneheaded mistake I made? This was right when 7 and 6 was coming in. 545 ammo from Russia. You know, 80s dated. Pretty new. And back at the beginning, it was advertised as non-corrosive. My dumbass took them at their word. It was cheap. Bought up a lot. Ran a lot through this guy. Not this guy. Because I didn't know it was corrosive. I did clean it. But the way you clean corrosive versus non-corrosive, especially here in Arkansas with our humidity, is different. In my first rut-row moment was when I went to remove my flash hider. These actually came in with a US like M16A1 style, and I had put on not this one but one like it, the Bulgarian bird cagey, and it wouldn't come off. That's when the rust thing happened. Now luckily the barrel was chrome lined and hammer forged, so it cleaned up okay, but I was so disgusted with myself for my behavior. And this was actually before I went to Russia for the last time in '08, so I actually sold that gun off. Just like, but it taught me. Big learning experience there. And it virtually has never happened again. Remember that Monarch ammo that Jay used? A little bit of it got into my RPD and froze it up a bit, but I caught it very early because I was kind of watching for it, and so it wasn't such a bad deal. The RPK-74 got bad because it sat there for a while. So sometimes you still have to do kit builds. And that's kind of where I've established my, not rule even, just the way I do things. I will have a kit build in the collection if there's just not an import alternative. AMD 65 is a good example. And by the way, the AMD 65 almost made it into this video. I have one of the TGI FEG guns because there's an import. Plenty of kit builds out there of probably higher quality, but there it is. But this, there's really not an option. Now you're thinking Vepers, right? No, because they're RPK-74Ms. Hey, I never said I wasn't a nitpicker, but there are little differences. But I'm still a learning, even at this point. Like I said, I got it before I went to Russia for the last time, sold it when I got back. I did sell quite a few guns when I got married for various reasons, you know, getting a house together and stuff. Priorities, guys. Needs must. Never been one of those types that say I'll never sell guns. I don't like to, and there are a few in my collection, especially like family heirlooms, that I never will. But you know, like with that Sam 5, sold it because something needed to go, and figured one day I could replace it. And even though I had to wait 10 years to do so, I did. And while the golden era of AKs is kind of coming to an end about this point, there's still some neat stuff coming in, and still a lot to learn and experience. Number 9, the penultimate. The Viper 12 shotgun. This is kind of one reason I didn't bring out the Viper RPK-74. I just, you know, want to break it up. Plus, the RPK-74 came much later. These are cool, though. They really were. And it was out of nowhere. Now, we had the Saiga 12 shotguns, but they were the hunter style. In 2011, there was a big flippy flap that the ATF was going to ban them. But in the end, not only did they continue to let them to be imported, they actually approved a pistol grip as a sporting feature for match shooters on semi-automatic shotguns, even mag-fed ones. So this is where you start to see Saiga 12s and even like the SGL 12 come in with features like that. And the Viper 12 would very much follow. Now, we'd had Vipers before, but they were rifles. And they were very, very sporterized, although they had pistol grips usually. They didn't really much look like RPKs. They looked good. They were sharp-looking guns, high-quality guns. The first importer I remember was Rob. This is the first that came in a correct configuration, long before the RPK-74. The very first ones had a pistol grip, threaded barrel with a nut on. Of course, standard mag well, because these are all single stack 5-round mags with the ship width. And not just a fixed buttstock, it was freaking hilarious. The first ones literally came in with the unfinished, raw, usually blemished, cracked wood stock. Didn't even have the sling swivel, not even sometimes the butt plate. They knew people were going to immediately pull those off and put on wherever they wanted, because it had a standard rear trunnion, so whatever stock you want. Now, later Vepr 12 fixed stock imports would have a more traditional polymer stock, but I wanted to bring this version out because this was the folder version. And this was cool because it was what, like, Spetsnaz and Russian police. And when these came in, they were sold as a fixed stock because the first batch had a teeny tiny little weld down here. And that was it. That night when this first came in, I believe it came from Centerfire, we were going out to dinner, and I thought, I wonder if I just push this in. I'm just going to cover my hand to kind of reenact it, and whack it, and it just broke. And I just burst out laughing at the laziness. It was actually connecting to the paint, so it was basically just breaking a paint blob. Now, later ones, they got a lot more aggressive. It was just that first batch. And these are pretty affordable, too, I'm not going to lie. More than the Saigas, but not by a whole lot. So with a stock that was fully working and folding, and oops, it just broke on me, what can you do? All I had to do was kind of source the other parts. These shipped with 5-round mags, and with the Saigas for years, getting the standard 8-round mags was kind of a chore and expensive. But one good thing, at this point, IO's doing the importation. Yeah, what can I say? Sometimes IO got things right. They were bringing over 8-round mags and selling them, especially wholesale, if you bought bulk, for about half of what a Saiga 8-round was going for. So not only do you have a better gun with a better mag system, the mags are cheaper. And eventually the 10-rounders would come in. And after these kind of came in around 1,200, then other importers got in the game, and the price dropped to retail of 800. And back then, Jay and I did a video saying, hey, if you are interested in something like this, get one. They will never be this cheap again. And boy, howdy, we'll be right. Because, as I said, Kalashnikov concern was sanctioned in summer of 2014, but Molot wasn't for a while. They had 3 years. And for a while, that's why the Vepr rifle, shotgun were kind of king here. But in the summer of 2017, yes, Trump's first term, although I doubt he had anything directly to do with it, just administration stuff, Molot was added to the list of sanctioned companies from Russia. Finally, number 10, influential gun. Remember how I said at the beginning of the video, even years in, I realized I could learn new things. Old dogs, new tricks. The Polish Squirrel, or rather, this is an archer. And yes, I do find it kind of funny that the last 2 guns in the video were actually IO Royal Tiger imports. What can I say? Sometimes a blind squirrel finds a nut. I should know about that. It took me a while on these. It really did, for a lot of reasons. One, I was dubious about 5.56 AKs. Mostly because a lot of the Galils that were assembled here were kind of dodgy. Ended up having a lot to do with the mags. Plus, I already had a SA M5 and an SLR 106 CR, which by the time these came in, I'd actually sold at least one, maybe both. I tried them out. I just, 545 was still readily available. 7.62 was cheap. I just didn't, and they took proprietary mags. And when these came in, the Generation 1s had the wrong barrel profile. They had a fixed stock. Mags were hard to find. They didn't even come with the POPC rail system. They were like $1,400, plus you had to doctor them up. They didn't look like a Beryl WZ96. And to get them in the right shape, you're going to spend over $2,000. I'll be honest, I knew the WZ96 existed, but hadn't been converted yet, but a customer in particular, and a couple others kind of on the wings, but one customer kept on and on about me about it. And then the Gen 2s came out, and they started coming with the adjustable current stock, loose in the box. They still had the fixed stock. And more importantly, they came with the correct 18-inch barrel and muzzle brake, although half the time it was actually on upside down. And that's when I bid. Oh, and the price came down a couple $100. So you got a stock. Oh, and the rail started to appear. So my first one was a Gen 2, and I actually ordered some of these mags out of Poland, along with the mag pouch I still have. And it just kind of became a project gun. And this is what made me a believer in 5.56 AKs. Is a true thing. The SER3 was a fun little blinker, but nothing crazy. And the SAM 5, while it was good, I have to admit it wasn't as reliable as my SAM 7 type guns. This is the Gen 3. The last version, only a couple hundred came in from IO before they stopped. It only 700 imported. That was around 2014, I believe. It has the 3 rivets in the rear. More importantly, it has the faux selector on the side. And what's weird is they never, ever, ever advertise that. Then again, they never advertised that it had an 18-inch barrel. Their website still said it had a 16. And they got the twist rate wrong, too. They said it had a 1 in 10. Yeah, they didn't care, really. A shame, too, though, because these got really cheap at the end. And the Gen 3s, they are what these always should have been. And they came with almost everything you needed. And it was a good learning experience. Not to judge a book by its cover, to give something. But for years, it was a desert. After these were no longer available, another thing I learned was around this time, 2013, 2014, people want what they can't have. When guns are available, people won't buy them. I tried to get people to buy these. A few close friends, I even just basically bought and gave it to them, saying, here, if you don't like it, I'll take it back. And they never did give it back. But as soon as they were gone, then they shot up to like $3,000. I think even $4,000 sometimes on Gunborker. What the? Okay, guys, whatever. What are you gonna do? Luckily, though, AOA, in partnership with at least advice from Atlantic, brought them in, and of course, they started coming in right around COVID, so that was great. And now they've announced, they're kind of ending. But at least we had another batch, and instead of only having 700 of this one style, we have a few thousand of 3 different styles. And I don't know if it's because this kind of got me involved, but because of this connection here, it kind of got me involved with WBP early on. We did that interview, Polish guns, and it's kind of become a key part of who I am. I'd say, like Swiss guns, the Swiss SIGs, and Polish guns, WBB, FB Radums, even, much to my chagrin, sometimes the Pioneers. They've just kind of become what I'm known for. And I'm cool with that, because they need an advocate, especially WBP. And because I learned with this, which I judge rather harshly based on IO and being a 223, give it a chance. I gave WBP a chance in 2016 and have not been disappointed yet. WBP could have easily been in this final slot. Absolutely could have been. And I think it's a great gun, but I don't know if it hadn't been for my experiences on a personal level with the Archer here, if I would have been as receptive to a non-combat country. And also, this is important because this was the first Polish AK rifle import we ever got. Before this, it was just parts kits and builds and things. This predated Pioneer. This predated WBP, of course. And this was the first FB Radom. And it's a wonder after dealing with IO that they didn't completely wash their hands of Americans 100% altogether. But luckily, after coaxing them back, we have a lot better options. And I've had a lot of fun with this gun. And I'm looking forward to the Garrote, which is no longer an AK. This will probably be the final AK style that Poland ever uses. And I've often told people, this is about as far, in my opinion, as you can push the AK and still have it recognizable as a Kalashnikov. You make many more changes than this. I would argue it's based on or inspired by the Kalashnikov. The Galil comes to mind. The SIG 5.50 comes to mind even maybe, but they're their own guns. A Galil is not an AK. A Galil is a Galil, and I say that as a credit to the gun, not a dismissal. This is still an AK, but just barely. And the nice thing is, I'm still learning, and I hope to still be learning 10 years, 20 years from now, and I hope we keep getting neat imports, although I'm not sure what it'd be, but I'm open to an M21 Zastava. Let's just wrap. And here they are, all laid out. They mostly fit on the table. Mostly. But hey, the RPKs kind of have their own table, right? So what do you think? Yeah, these are the ones that kind of came to mind as the most influential and that taught me the most, or at least guns that replaced the guns that were there, like the Yugoslavian and the Arsenal. But that's really how I accumulated my AK knowledge, guys. It was just through time, dedication, experience, some luck, and hard work. And as I mentioned at the beginning, when I started off, I was not even a novice. I was truly ignorant, cleaning rod story withstanding. And even after being in AKs for well over a decade, the Beryl, the Archer, taught me. I still had things I could learn and appreciate. And I've enjoyed the project guns. It's really fun to work on a gun. Make it your own. And there are some that are just fun. The Vepr 12. Just a lot of fun. Not a lot of military shotguns out there either. And some guns, like the AES-10B, it took me a few tries to get right. A few, dud purchases or not quite right. So don't be afraid to upgrade and improve and, buy what's good enough then, and then maybe something better will come along later. You know that Mikhail Kalashnikov would agree with good enough. But I'd love to hear your own stories and what you think. And as always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. Help on Patreon. And really, the support we've had this week, be it donations or just liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, it's given me really the energy to go forward and make some of these new videos. I mean, I would do it anyway, but I guess I do it with a smile more. I don't know. I don't want to say, look, if you don't help me, I'm not going to do videos. That's not honest. That's blackmail. On the other hand, it is hard on an emotional level to make videos and, spend your whole day, forego doing other things, and just not get a lot of feedback, unfortunately. And again, finances, I understand, but come on, some of the comments in that video acted like liking cost money. It does not. It costs one click. And it's really more of YouTube that it matters. It really is. So we'll keep going forward. Next week is Thanksgiving. Got some neat stuff planned. Been reaching out for other things. See where we go from there, guys. With that, now I've got to pack all this in before we lose daylight again. Wintertime. This is Misha. Catch you next time.